Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into the Air Raid Hour. I am your host for tonight, David Tilton. You can find me on Twitter at TiltMoney. I'm joined tonight by co-host extraordinaire Kendall Mursky. You can find him on Twitter at Mursky Kendall. No judge tonight. He is going to a concert tonight for the first time in the post-pandemic era, so couldn't miss it. And Kendall and I are going to be here tonight to talk the Bills defense ahead of the schedule release show we have for Thursday. So Kendall, I'll start with this. You were telling me a little bit earlier that you might be going golfing today. Did you actually
I
go golfing
didn't.
today?
I
Oh.
didn't. It was like 50 degrees here in Utah, and then I was just kind of like, I have some prep work for this. I have some prep work for film room. I could squeeze it all in, but I don't want to rush myself to do that, and I want to just enjoy myself on the course. So I may go tomorrow if I can get enough prep work in for film room tomorrow tonight. That way I can just be loose on the course tomorrow afternoon. But yeah, I'm really trying to hit the course in this week specifically. I don't know why, but I have an itch. I have an itch to play golf this week.
I always have the itch. So it's been a little bit weird here in North Carolina. It was in like the 40s yesterday here. So weather was a little weird here. But tonight's show, the main topic, we're going to be breaking down the post-draft roster on the defensive side of the ball. On Thursday, we did offense. Tonight, we're going to be doing defense, kind of going through some questions I have for you, Kendall, and some thoughts I want to get from the comment section. So we'll get to that in just a minute, but we will start with some news of the day, which is that the Bills will be hosting the Titans week 2 at home, Monday Night Football, first kind of schedule leak, if you will, official schedule leak, if you want to call it that, for the Bills this year. And Judge put an interesting Twitter question out to the masses today. How many primetime games you think the Bills will get? And he set the number at 4.5, which I thought was a good number. But first, I want to ask you specifically about the Titans. We were just talking before we came on the air. 5 times now, or I guess what it'll be, 5 out of 6, right? Times McDermott has faced the Titans. And now this will be the 18, 19, 20, 21, fourth year in a row.
It would be the 5th.
19, 20, fifth year in a row facing the Titans. What do you make of this kind of Bills-Titans rivalry? Because in my mind, there is a little bit of a rivalry here between these two teams.
I mean, it's truly budding. I mean, the fact that I think it was the first year in 2018, I want to say we were playing the AFC South. So that was just, first year you're playing that division. But then year after year after year after year, outside of last year, we also played the AFC South. Those 2 years in between that, it was just, common record opponent
Right.
in your conference. And I mean, yeah, at this point, Ombre Lob comes in. It is a rivalry. What else are we supposed to call it? Like, they've played close games. They played good games for national television. They played good games not nationally televised that probably deserved to be nationally televised just because they were so entertaining. It's just a
Duke
good
Williams
matchup.
season, who could forget?
Right. Like every single time. It's just a good matchup. And I mean, yeah, I hate to say it. And I mean, it just sucks with the last 2 times that we've lost to the Titans in the last 2 seasons. It sucks. It's like, it's really a tough pill to swallow. And I'm sure the Bills are thinking the same way. That locker room is probably real jacked up to play the Titans, get another crack at them, especially at home. But I think it's interesting because of the matchups that it presents, because we know the Bills are built to stop the pass and pass the football, and the Titans are built to run the football. So it's always an interesting little paradigm shift when we have the Bills playing the Titans and how they kind of have to shift up what they're used to doing to play the Titans and to get the best outcome. And it always creates a good game. So I'm excited for it. Interesting note, though. It's a 7:15 kickoff, so week 2 is going to have a double header at Monday night.
Well, my understanding is that there isn't going to be a Monday night game week 1. Now, I could be wrong about that. Someone can fact check me. In that they're opening the Monday Night Football schedule in week 2. Someone in the comments can fact check me on that, but I believe that's what I was reading. Jessica says Bills versus Lions on Thanksgiving consider primetime. Yes, I think it would.
Thanksgiving's primetime.
And this is an interesting comment here from Ombre Lob. Says they also have history with one another because of the Oilers in the 90s. Obviously, we know the comeback from the 90s and then the Music City Miracle, et cetera, et cetera. Dilly says Titans have gotten the best of us 2020 and 2021. 2019 was different in 2022. Will be different. There is a rivalry here at this point,
Sure.
right? And even though they're not in the same division, it kind of harkens back a little bit to some of the non-divisional rivalries we've kind of seen in the NFL over the years. Obviously, the Bills Chiefs gets talked about a lot as kind of that like Manning Brady rivalry of years past with the Colts and the Pats. But there's always been this kind of like weird, interdivisional rivalries that have existed that have kind of existed, like the Ravens and Patriots for a while were kind of a rivalry, right? And they met each other in the playoffs a few times. It seemed like the Steelers and the Broncos met each other in the playoffs more than a handful of times. We know about the Tebow miracle in that playoff game. And then obviously, Manning on his last leg ended up beating the Steelers in the playoffs. I believe that year they went to the Super Bowl and won against the Panthers. So these rivalries like that are sort of across divisions within the same conference are kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And the Bills have that right now with the Titans. Vrabel obviously coming from, the Pats sort of, franchise background there. There's a little bit of a no love lost there. Plus, I think Vrabel's an ass anyway. And then there's just been this kind of undercurrent of bad blood between these teams. It feels like on the field as well. Yeah. And so it is definitely a rivalry. I'm excited about that. I don't mind the 7:15 start.
Neither do I. Yeah.
But it is interesting. So we'll save most of the scheduled talk for Thursday's show, when the schedule will actually be released on Thursday, and we'll go through all the games. But Titans now officially a home primetime game, which is cool. It is nice to see the Bills get a home primetime game locked in, because it does feel like the last couple years, most of their primetime games have been on the road. So that should just about do it for Titans Bills, and we'll jump right into our main topic of the night. We're probably not going to go super long form tonight with Judge not here. He's usually the one spurring us along on this, but we're talking defense tonight. And we're going to go through some interesting questions, I think, and we're going to go by position group, and we're going to start with the edge group, right? Obviously, Von Miller was the big addition to this room in the offseason. But guys like Jerry Hughes, guys like Mario Addison, they're not here anymore, right? So you take a look at this DN room. You got Von Miller, and then you got three young guns, right? Greg Rousseau, Boogie Basham, AJ Epinesa. You've got the coming back to where it all started, former first-round pick Shaq Lawson. And then you've got a guy like Mike Love, who's been kind of hanging around the team for a couple years in the practice squad, and local guy here, Kingsley Jonathan from Syracuse. So, Kendall, my first question to you, because Aaron Quinn kind of spurred this thought in my mind when Steve put the graphic up about this group as a whole. Is this group actually better collectively than the group we had last year? Or do you project them to be better group collectively than what we had on the field last year in 2021?
So I think the key is that I project them to be better, but it's really tough to sit here and say that they will be better. I mean, to replace a Jerry Hughes and a Mario Addison with three young guys that were just kind of hoping piece it together and grow and take that next step forward. We don't know what we're going to be getting with Groot, Boogie, and Epinesa this year, albeit all have had flashes in their own respective way. We don't know what they're going to be doing, and we don't know if they'll be able to fill the void left by Jerry Hughes and Mario Addison. But with that being said, you add a Von Miller to the mix, and you're like, it's hard to say this group got worse. So it's a really tough question to answer, but I think the key word is, what do you project it to be? Because I do project it to be better, because I assume that Boogie will take a step forward in the role that he has. I'm hoping that Epinesa finds some more consistency. I'm hoping that Groot finds some pass rushing to his game, stuff like that. But then you do have that kind of floor that you're going to be getting or hoping to be getting from a Shaq Lawson. So it's very interesting when you have the dependability from those vets that we lost this offseason, and then you're looking to replace them with unknown commodities. You don't know what we're going to be getting fully from those three young guns. So I think that's the biggest leap for what do you
Mhm.
project going forward? Because yeah, wholeheartedly, Von Miller makes this room better, but he's just one guy. He's
He's
just
just
one
one
guy.
guy. And this is an interesting super chat from your boy Lettuce, and we always appreciate that, you boy. I mean, obviously, he loves the punt god. Who'll let our number one scoring defense even be more stingy. Maybe only give up 9 points a game. Vaughn will get all of the strip sacks returned for TDs, and that's something I think that Bills fans have been asking for
Yeah.
from the defensive line is more game changing type plays. We saw Groot get one of those game changing type plays in that game against the Chiefs last year.
Yeah.
So
Uh-huh.
there is potential there. I think that's the thing for me that is interesting to project, right? You have veterans that you kind of knew what you were getting out of Jerry Hughes and you knew what you were getting out of Mario Addison. And were they world beaters? No. Were they
No.
above average players? I would say yes, they were above average. But now they're gone, right? Those two veterans are and those years of experience are out of the room, and you're now really relying on Von Miller as that, elder statesman in the room to bring these guys along. And
Yeah.
maybe Shaq Lawson to an extent can play a role
Right.
like that. But really, between Jerry Hughes and Mario Addison last year, you really had two solid guys who had been with the team and knew the culture and were ingrained in the locker room. So this mix of guys is very interesting to me. Von Miller's a unicorn. We know that. He's a stud. He's going to bring it. But what is the future going to be like, or what is the projection going to look like for guys like Rousseau, Basham, and Epinesa? I maybe won't go as far to say that it's like a make or break year for AJ Epinesa, but I think some people would go that far.
And I think it's
Uh,
fair to say it.
and this is an interesting take on it too. Truth to Heart says there is no void. Jerry Hughes and Addison didn't show being anything he didn't feel the young guns couldn't do, and there may be some truth to that.
Sure.
It was obvious by the signing of Von Miller that the Bills acknowledged that they needed to get home more with the pass rush, right? You
Mhm.
don't bring a guy like we talk about pressures a lot with Jerry Hughes. We talked about that a lot at nauseum almost. You don't sign a guy like Von Miller to not get home to the quarterback, right? And make
Mhm.
game-changing
Mhm.
plays in crunch time, right? Late in games, he's a closer. That's what he's known for. Late game closer, playoff closer, like go back to even his career in Denver. Like
Yeah.
I watched a lot of Denver Broncos games with my best friend's a Broncos fan. The guy closes in the fourth quarter. That's what he
Mhm.
does. He makes the play to seal the game for you, and that's what he's going to do, hopefully for the Bills. Jessica has an interesting comment here. Groot will be bigger and stronger. He could easily put on 30 pounds of muscle. I mean, the dude's already massive. So that's going to be a very interesting. It's going to be interesting, right? Because the most pressure is probably on Rousseau to be that
Mhm.
bookend with Miller. But in my mind, I feel like there's almost as much, if not more, pressure on AJ Epinesa to make an impression this year. So um, we'll see about that. So the next question I have for you, right, is kind of a nice segue into talking about Mario Addison and Jerry Hughes. Do you think as the season gets going, right, do we think that there will be an acknowledgement or maybe how do I phrase this? A yeah, and I guess an acknowledgement, or maybe where there'll be an admission from some fans that maybe those two guys were underappreciated for what they brought to the team, or are we just gonna say no, we're moving on. It's gonna be fine. Are we gonna feel them being missing? I guess is my question to you.
I think there will be moments. I don't know if I can say as a blanket statement that the fan base and most of Bill's Mafia will feel like, oh God, it's really tough that we just lost Jerry Hughes and Mario Addison. But I do think there will be moments when you miss the consistency, albeit, yeah, they didn't have high sack rates, albeit they didn't have game altering plays all the time. And I think having signing a Von Miller helps alleviate some of those concerns, some of those fears of losing out on that dependability, that consistency. But I think when you like if Epineza doesn't find consistency, if Boogie can't even get dressed on game day like he struggled
Mm.
to do at a large clip of last year, then you start to wonder like what was the play with getting rid of some of those dependable guys that could give you solid rotational snaps. I'm not here to say that Epinesa and Basham can't be better than what Hughes and Addison did last year, but I'm not going to lie, they set the bar pretty high. Addison led the team in sacks, and Hughes was top 15 in the league in pressure rate. And I don't see Epinesa and Boogie filling those shoes in such a consistent role this next year. That being said, they have plenty of potential to work with. So I'm confident that they can take a next step, but will they take a next step and find consistency? And that's what I think the key is to missing Hughes and Addison. It's the consistency, it's the dependability from those two vets. And I think ultimately getting Von Miller does definitely mitigate some of that, but I don't know if it'll mitigate all of it.
And this is an interesting point from Jessica. The league has spoken about Jerry and Mario. They were not considered above average. Mario went to the Texans and Jerry has not signed. That's true, right? I mean,
Mhm.
the same can be said about guys like Daryl Williams, who were cut loose by the Bills, who haven't signed anywhere, right? Like guys that we kind of maybe thought were above average, and some of the analytics pointed to some advanced stats that said they were above average in pressure rates and things like that. But the league has spoken, right? Like they haven't signed. I know they're older
Sure.
guys, but like if there was some juice left in the tank, and maybe Jerry's waiting around for training camp to see kind of what happens with teams and pick his spot because he's kind of at that point in his career where that's probably makes the most sense for him. But
Mhm.
it's a very interesting thing. We got looks like Judge coming in from probably his phone or something. Take this show higher, gentlemen. We're trying to. It's kind of like our uh our last little sort of post draft bit before we get into schedule and then really
Yeah.
start moving ahead to the season preview. So um this defensive end room, it is very interesting, and that kind of leads me to my next question specifically about Von Miller, and that is we know how heavy of a rotation the Bills employ on their defensive line. How do you feel about Von Miller becoming part of a rotation? Will this help him stay fresh later in games? Will it help him make a bigger impact at the end of games given his age? Do you want to see him playing an outsized proportion of snaps given the money that we've given him? Or what is your, I guess, what my question to you and the comment section is, what's your ideal utilization of Von Miller in this defense? Snaps wise, role, like where do you see him? Where do you see him from that perspective?
I do want to see him rotate just in the regard of saving him at his age. I do want to see some element of rotation. And yeah, he said he doesn't want to be rotated. So that's going to be the key to this. I'm going to piece it all together. I want to see him rotated still because it's part of the system. It's part of what Sean McDermott does, but I don't want to see it overdone because he is the best pass rusher in this room. You need to let that guy eat. And the more you take him off the field, the more he stays hungry. So you want to make sure he's on the field as much as possible. That being said, he's old. He's 33. He's still got gas in the tank, but he's 33. But you want to preserve that through the first 3 years of this contract. You want to make sure you're getting the most out of this contract. So, numbers wise, I wish I had it up right here. I can pull it up quickly, but I want to say something around like 60 to 70%, probably closer to the 70% clip is what I would want to see
Mm,
from him. But the key is making sure you're not taking him down out of the game on money downs, on third downs, on critical second and long, whatever it is, just critical passing downs when you have confidence that the offense is going to pass the football. I don't want to see Von Miller being taken off the field by the coaching staff. I only want to see Von Miller being taken off the field because he's tapping his helmet and he wants a young guy to come in for a play. I don't want to see the coaching staff taking him off in those specific scenarios, but holistically, I do still want to see him as part of the rotation. He's got to be the A side of that rotation, not the B side, because he is the stud in the room.
Yeah, and that becomes an interesting dynamic, right? Because you look at it and you're like, well, you signed him for his pass rush ability. He's still pretty good run defender in his own right, but then you bring a guy like Shaq Lawson back into the mix, who's kind of hung his hat on being a good run defender on the edge. You have a bigger edge player and a guy like Boogie Basham, who you expect can help you against the run. Obviously, Rousseau showed pretty well against the run last year, so it's going to be very interesting to see kind of how they utilize Vaughn there in that situation. And Ned, thank you for the super chat, comes in and says, help us understand how this defense isn't better this year. Hughes and Starr were only taking marginal snaps and realized stats. I don't know that anyone's saying the defense isn't going to be better. But we were the number one defense statistically last year. And
Only one place to go.
And most of all the DVOA, key stats, third downs, fourth downs, third and longs, like we were either number one or near the top in most of those stats defensively. So I think, as I've said many times, it's very hard to sustain elite defense. The Bills have done a really good job in McDermott's era to really have solid defenses every year he's been here, which makes sense. That's his calling card. But if the Bills aren't the number one defense statistically next year, it wouldn't surprise me. That doesn't mean they're not going to be elite or in some ways maybe be better, right? Maybe they get more sacks. Maybe they get, more and maybe sacks at more important times in games. Like those things we kind of all have to see out. And there's a qualitative side to this as well. But I definitely agree with Ned as far as like the moves the Bills are making. I do like this unit holistically a lot and think they can be as good, if not better, than the unit from a year ago. So that leads me into the last question I have for you on the defensive end room, the young guns. We talked a lot about Von Miller. We talked about the departures of Addison and Hughes. What should we expect out of this sort of young trio of Rousseau, Basham, Epinesa this year? And should we have any kind of real expectations for guys like Shaq Lawson, Mike Love, or Kingsley Jonathan at all during training camp? I mean, Shaq Lawson looks like he's probably on the inside looking out right of the roster right now. If the Bills end up keeping 5, it seems like it. But guys like Mike Love have been hanging around. Kingsley Jonathan seems to me like more like a practice squad bound type of guy. So what are the expectations for these guys? Because these guys are going to be the bulk of the rotation, right, this year.
So I'll take it one step at a time, and I'll try to be short and sweet about it. With Epinesa, I think it's going to be a step forward for all of them. It's specifically like what I'm looking for expectation-wise. It's just a step forward for all of them because we need to start seeing that now that they're going to start getting opportunities. So for Epinesa, it's take a step forward in snap count and consistency. You finally have a chance to garner a high snap count in this rotation. They are giving you a chance. They are giving you a vote of confidence with the departure of Hughes and the departure of Addison and really only adding Von Miller and Lawson. There is a clear path for you to get playing time.
Yep.
Earn it and then be consistent with it. I think that's the key for him, finding consistency in his game, enough consistency to give confidence to the coaching staff to continue giving him those snaps. So I think that's the key thing for Epinesa for me that I'll be looking forward to. For Groot, he was outstanding against the run. I mean, outstanding. I think he was number one in run stops for rookie. He was number one in run stops for all defensive ends as a rookie. So that was truly impressive. But what I want to see from him this year, I already have that expectation where he's going to be great against the run. I want to see him take a step forward with his pass rush repertoire. I want to see him start to use moves. I don't want to see him just rushing with athleticism and length. I want to see him use specific moves, some moves that maybe Von Miller has been coaching him up on over the offseason, stuff like that. I want to start seeing some refinement to the way he rushes the passer, not just using his God-given size. So I'd like to see that. And then lastly, with Boogie, I want him to show the staff that he deserves to be dressed on game day. I want him to show the staff that he
Mm.
understands his role. He understands that his role is to be a part of this rotation and to thrive with whatever opportunities they give him. That he deserves to be dressed, and those moments that he does see snaps on the field, he needs to capitalize in those moments. I'm not, based on what he was doing last year, I'm not going to have high expectations for Boogie Basham. I'm just not.
Mhm.
There's no reason to. The sacks he got, there wasn't a clear pass rush plan. It was purely motor tenacity sacks. They were motor plays. They weren't, oh, look at this technical refine. It wasn't anything like that. It was,
Mm.
my motor's running hot. I'm going to get after this guy until the play is over, until the whistle is blown. So I want to see him continue to play with that chip on his shoulder, continue to play with that hot motor, but do it in the moments, obviously, that you are given. And it's probably not going to be a lot of moments. He's probably not going to get a ton of opportunities. But like you said, there is an open door for him to go and earn more opportunities. So I just want to see him step forward in that role, because he truly is. I think he's going to be a significant role player in this defensive end room, but he needs to prove it this year.
Yeah, he does. Sophia comes in. Thanks for the super chat. Says, I'm getting nervous about Poyer. Any news? No news as of yet. I wouldn't expect maybe to hear anything soon necessarily, but maybe this summer. Again, that's just me speculating, but no news as of now. I'm with you, Kendall, on that. I think Rousseau, the ceiling's very high for him. If he can
Mm-hmm.
get some of those, technical aspects to his game refined on the pass rush moves, he's got a really high ceiling. Epinesa to me is interesting. I think that you start looking across this, I'm just looking at this graphic right here. Von Miller, Gregory Rousseau, Boogie Basham, AJ Epinesa, Shaq Lawson. You got, what was Von Miller, the number 2 overall pick in that draft that Darius was from?
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't it like Cam Newton,
Something
Von
like
Miller,
that, yeah.
Darius was like the 3rd pick. So you had Von Miller, number 2 overall pick, Greg Rousseau, 1st round pick, Boogie Basham, 2nd round pick, Epinesa, 2nd round pick, Shaq Lawson, 1st round pick. I mean, you've got a lot of talent on this defensive end, in this defensive end group. So I'm hoping that it's just the right mix of skill sets, and you see that jump forward from Rousseau, Basham, and Epinesa. And it doesn't mean they all have to jump forward necessarily at the same rate or
Right.
at the same impact, but something. Show me something. Show me a Jason says Darius trying to come back. Yeah.
Yeah, with Baltimore.
He signed with Baltimore. That's interesting. I feel like he's probably still in his low 30s at this point. He
Yeah,
can't be
something like
that
that.
old.
Feels like a dinosaur, though.
I know. All right, so that should just about wrap up our conversation on the defensive end room. Any last minute thoughts on Mike Love or Kingsley Jonathan?
I will say I am intrigued by Kingsley Jonathan. I think I said it on our last show that I was on, just purely from like the athletic testing and the archetype that he is. I'm intrigued. Homegrown talent, Syracuse player, all that stuff. I'm intrigued, but I mean, Mike Love has been here forever. Like forever. There's some semblance of confidence in him as a practice squad player, as someone who could come in a pinch via injury, whatever it is, because he understands what is asked of him. He understands the responsibilities and everything like that. But I am intrigued by Kingsley Jonathan and the athletic testing and all of that side to it. So I'm intrigued, but I'm not expecting much. Like you said, I think Shaq Lawson is that 5th guy. He's on the inside looking out. Mike Love and Kingsley Jonathan really got to put forward a great preseason to beat out someone like Shaq Lawson, in my opinion.
Yep. 100% agree. So now moving on to the interior, and now we start talking about this combination of this edge room and this interior, and it's been kind of not totally, I should say, but it has been overhauled for a team that, was an elite defense and a deep playoff team. You've got Ed Oliver, obviously the news about a week or so ago that the Bills picked up his 5th-year option. No surprises there. Bills go out in free agency and double dip, really triple dip if you want to count Jordan Phillips in that group, with Daquan Jones from the Panthers, Tim Settle from Washington, and then Jordan Phillips again coming back home, a la Shaq Lawson. Then you've got still Eli Anku in the mix, who had some good reps last year. Brandon Bryant, who I know Judge likes. Feels like he should be given a chance this year. And then the UDFA Prince Emili from Penn, who is an interesting prospect. So obviously the Bills went out in free agency and said, look, we've got to do something about this interior defensive line. We're going to revamp this line around Ed Oliver. Vernon Butler, to most fans' joy, is no longer here. Obviously, to most fans' chagrin, Harrison Phillips, now with the Vikings, hated to see him go. But, that's the business side of,
Good to see him make some money.
Yeah,
That's
good
the
to see him
positive.
make some money. And so, you lose Harrison Phillips, Vernon Butler's gone. And we didn't even mention really on the last segment, F.A. Obata also gone.
All
But
right.
so you bring in Daquan Jones and Tim Settle to go along with Jordan Phillips, who is really more of a pass rushing defensive tackle for as big as he is, and then Anku, Bryant, and Emili. So around Ed Oliver, you've surrounded him with, we think, is going to be a two-gapping style defensive tackle on Daquan Jones. And in my opinion, Tim Settle, who is more of a pass rushing 3-tech. A lot of people want to kind of label him as a tweener, 3-tech, 1-tech. I don't necessarily see it, but hey, I'm just one guy. And then Jordan Phillips, who in my mind is really just a 3-tech, even though his size would say that he could probably play 1-tech, but that's, again, not really how I see it. What do you make of this room? What do you make of the mix of roles you see here? Obviously, Ed Oliver and Daquan Jones look to be the top two as the starters. But what do you make of the rest of this group? Do you see this group as being vastly improved versus a year ago? The top end has really been retooled, but does the depth concern you at all? Or are you looking at this group top to bottom thinking, okay, this room looks pretty good right now?
I like the room, but the depth does concern me. And the
Yeah, me too.
depth
Yeah,
has
good point,
also, I
Jason.
mean, the depth has always concerned me with this group. I think it's just that, because I like the signings of Jones and Settle. I like bringing back Phillips, but let's say one of those top four guys get injured. You're hoping that Anku, Bryant, or Emili come in and give you some significant snaps in that rotation, because we know that the rotation isn't just the edge guys, it's also those interior guys. Ed Oliver is not out there for every single snap. And, God forbid he goes down, who's the starting 3-tech? God forbid Daquan Jones goes down, who's the starting 1-tech? So that's my biggest concern with this group. It is the lack of depth, but I do like what they did at the top end. I see the vision for what they're building. They're building a top two of Ed Oliver, in my opinion, of Ed Oliver and Daquan Jones. And then behind them, they have two big guys who are hypothetically tweeners. They are guys with the size to be 1-techs, but they play more like 3-techs.
Right.
So I think it is interesting, and I see the vision from that perspective. But the interior defensive line specifically, it lacks depth, in my opinion, and you're hoping for no injuries. And I mean, we're like, Zimmer's still coming back from an injury, no? Like he's
Yeah.
still rehabbing. So that's kind of the other thing. That's a great point too. Boogie coming in, playing some defensive tackle. I think we saw it a little bit last year, but
Yep.
that's part of what I said about Boogie. Like he's got to earn it. He's got to show that he is stout enough on the interior to do that, even on passing down. So it's a bit of a projection. We saw it a little bit last year, but is that something they were forced to do for personnel reasons, or is it something they truly envision him doing moving forward? So it's tough to project that.
Yeah, and I think for Boogie, right, he's got to find any and all ways to get on the field to make an
Yeah.
impact. And if that means sliding inside on passing downs, if the Bills feel like he can be of value doing that, then that's what he'll probably do, right? And then, Steve Lynn comes in and says Anku and Settle are good backups. I don't disagree with that at all. I think they're good backups. Jessica says the DTs in my mind are bigger and stronger, more athletic this year. I do think athletically,
Yeah.
I agree. I would have to agree with that, right? And I do agree with you as far as like the top end. And then if you face any kind of injury, you are kind of in that same boat you were when Star was here, right? If Daquan Jones goes down, like you really don't have another true 1-tech, maybe Eli Anku, right? But you had Eli Anku last year, and maybe he just needs another year. I don't know. It's going to be very interesting to see
Mm-hmm.
kind of how the rotations pan out in camp. And I'll ask you because, we talked a lot even after the Bills signed Daquan Jones and Tim Settle and Jordan Phillips in free agency about possibly adding a real kind of one tech style player in the draft. And they didn't really do that. Obviously, they signed Prince Emili as a UDFA, but they didn't go after in the draft a interior defensive lineman. Are you surprised by that? Are you disappointed by that? How do you feel about the Bills not addressing interior in the draft? Does it bother you at all?
It doesn't bother me. I will say that was one of my dark horse like hot takes that I had through the pre-draft process, that despite everything they did this offseason to retool that interior defensive line, I still felt like they lack cost control in that area, especially now that Oliver's looking like he's going to get that second contract. Who knows? But either way, it's trending in that direction. So you don't have cost control in that room. So I would have thought they would take a stab at someone in the mid to late rounds. Losing a fourth rounder certainly doesn't help that cause. But I don't know. It's really tough to say. I'm a little upset, but I wouldn't say they made a mistake by not doing it. And the reason I say that is definitely in hindsight. When you look back at the draft, I mean, when are you going to take that defensive tackle? Because the top tier defensive tackles that anyone even wanted, I mean, they were
Mm-hmm.
going to cost a lot.
Yes.
You were going to have to replace Elam. You were going to have to replace that with Cook. You were going to have to replace that with Bernard. You're going to have to replace that with Kaiir. And I don't think anyone really wants to do any of those things. But I came
Right.
back to it just to, kind of flesh out the entire question. The one pick that I would feel most comfortable doing that with would be the Bernard pick in the third round. And even then, it's a stretch, but I have two names. Ioma Uwuzurike from Iowa State and Neil Farrell were both on the board at the time of that pick. It would be a little rich to take both of those guys at the back end of the third round, but they
Right.
were both available. So, those are the only two guys that come to mind in some sense of need value, but it's still a stretch. So
Yeah.
I can't sit here and say they made a mistake. The way they saw the defensive tackle position in this draft, they probably thought it was too top heavy for the level of need that position was, and they were willing to wait a year. And
Yep.
that's what I think they did. Do I think it's a mistake? No. But time will tell.
Mm-hmm.
Next year will really be the answer to that question, and specifically how this group plays this year, of course, will help answer that question. But yeah, it's a tough one to answer because the depth is truly concerning to me.
Yeah. I mean, and after the Bills spent heavy draft capital on, defensive line over the past, 3-4 years, and then kind of adding to that on the offensive line side of the ball with adding Spencer Brown in the third round. Like this draft, like they pretty much spent no draft capital on either line, right? If you think
Yeah,
about it, right? Like they drafted Tenuta, right? But like where else was the investment? There wasn't any,
there
right? So
wasn't.
so it's just, interesting. Each year is very different. The Bills had a trend going of investing heavy in the line, but it was clear that there was that glaring hole at corner. And so we're going to get to that in a second. But um, Ed Oliver, right? Bills pick up his fifth-year option. And let me get to you boys' super chat here. Seeing how cheap that Vikings pick was, I think we could have made a move for Jordan Davis. Yeah, that would have been a very interesting play.
I would
Cost
have.
control, we've talked about that, right? That would have been
Mhm.
an interesting play right there. Might have been too rich for the Bills to go back to the
Exactly
well
right.
again. Defensive line for like the fifth time in the early rounds. But so I'm looking at, I did a little kind of check on some of the top interior defensive line contracts going around or in the NFL right now. Ed Oliver, the team picks up his fifth-year option. I think most people, I would imagine, would like to have him stick around beyond that with a nice contract extension, but obviously the devil's always in the details of the money. Um, I'm going to give you a couple names right here, and I think you might be surprised at the average dollars per year that some of these guys
Mhm.
are making. Shelby Harris, Seahawks, $9 million a year. Dalvin Tomlinson, $10.5 million a year from the Vikings. Akeem Hicks, $12 million from the Bears. Javon Hargrave, $13 million from the Eagles. DJ Reader, $13.25 million for the Bengals. So, like, you start getting up there, and obviously Aaron Donald's at the top 20s. Like, the top 20 or so-ish interior defensive linemen are all kind of clearing that $10 million a year range AAV, right? Your DJ Jones of the Broncos, $10 million a year AAV, and there's about 20 to 25, 20 guys at that range. What kind of dollars right now on May 9th before the season starts would you be comfortable shelling out to Ed Oliver in a contract extension? And Steve says here average about 9 to 10 million. Comment section, let me know what you think. What are you willing to give Ed Oliver AAV right now on maybe a 4 or 5 year deal after his 5th year option? Kendall, your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a problem. Like, the average is 9 to 10, but Ed Oliver is above average player. So what are we going to do here? His 5th year option is 10.75 million. Like,
Yep.
it's pretty hefty, but I mean, let's be honest. I think he deserves more than that if he were to get extended. You said some of those guys at around 10 million AAV. Dalvin Tomlinson, he's a different kind of player. He's more of a one tech space eating type of player, and there aren't a lot of comparable guys to Ed Oliver in this position. So it's tough to really compare him to any of these guys, but I think the most comparable is Grady Jarrett. I think he's the most comparable type of player. He's the most comparable in terms of production. And I don't know if he'll get as much as Grady Jarrett's, what is it right here? 16 and a half AAV. I don't know if people are willing to do that. So what I will say, I will use the caveat of right now before the season, I am comfortable extending him for 4 years beyond this 5th year extension for somewhere in the range of 12 to 13. I think he probably deserves more than that, but 12 to 13 is what I'm comfortable with. If he puts up another year like he just did, another year like 2021, I think he's going to be closer to that 14 to 15 million AAV range. And I think that's just a pill we're all going to have to swallow if you want to keep Ed Oliver. And hopefully, as fans, if people want to feel a little bit better about that dollar figure, obviously this is not set in stone. This is just me speculating on the whole thing. But the TV money is set to come in very soon. So that 14 to 15 million is not going to be the same percentage of the cap that it will be in 2023, that it will be in 2024, 2025, 2026. So I think that makes it a bit easier of a pill to swallow. That being said, I think the best comparable for him is Grady Jarrett, and Grady Jarrett's at 16 and a half. He's got 12 sacks in his first 3 years of NFL play. So it's tough to really work through it, obviously, because contracts are so fickle, but let's be honest, guys, he's worth more than his 5th year option. That is 10.75.
Yeah, this is a nice clean number here. Duncan Kitt says 4-year, 50 million, like about 12 and a half. That's a 12.5 million AAV. I think that would be kind of if the Bills kind of were able to work that out now, that'd be a bargain, I think, for the Bills, but still a nice payday for that. Oliver. It would come down to the guaranteed money, of course. But yeah, I think I'm with you, Kendall. I think right now, somewhere between that, what Duncan Kitt says, 4-year, 50, between 4 for 50 and 4 for 60, somewhere in there is probably what he's shooting for, what I would be shooting for if I was the Bills. Land somewhere in that realm, and that's probably going to make both sides happy. So very interesting. Obviously, that's going to have to be talked in the context of what other guys that you have to re-sign as well. Dawson Knox, Tremaine Edmonds. And speaking of Tremaine Edmonds, let's transition now to linebacker. The linebacker room. Wow. What a difference a year makes for the depth of this group. I mean, Judge and I have talked for a few years about kind of retooling the bottom half of this depth chart. You remember it was just a few short years ago where you had guys like Julian Stanford in the mix here in this room, and Voshawn Joseph, who's now obviously not on the team anymore.
Yeah, Ramon
Um,
Humber.
Ramon Humber, another good name. But this is the room now. There's a lot of players in this room. And I kind of was like listing them out. I'm like, wow, the Bills actually have a lot of linebackers right now on the roster. So obviously Tremaine and Matt at the top. They lost AJ Klein. I shouldn't say they lost him. I don't believe he's signed anywhere yet. So he's still just floating out there as a free agent. They go ahead and they draft Terrell Bernard in the 3rd round of the draft. They draft Balin Spector in the draft. They had already re-signed, because I think Markel Lee had already been with the team previously. They brought him back. Tyler Matakevich, special teams ace. Tyrell Dodson, who a lot of fans like. Andre Smith, another special teams ace. And Joe Giles Harris from Duke, local guy here in North Carolina. Solid player from Jacksonville. Judge really likes him. Just a good all-around guy to have kind of around your locker room and on the team. He was on the practice squad last year. So this group, right, the top is the same, right? Tremaine and Matt. But the big question the first question I should say I have for you is the Bills lost AJ Klein, right? Added a bevy of names to this group during the offseason, including Terrell Bernard. The question a lot of people are going to ask is, did the Bills draft Terrell Bernard with sights on having a contingency plan for Tremaine Edmunds should he not be in the mix in 2023? And my answer is I don't see it. I don't see it like as a physical fit.
Yeah.
Maybe as a mental fit or and aptitude fit.
Yeah.
Sure, but I don't necessarily see that as a physical fit. So I'll ask you, because you've now had some time to kind of digest and do some film work on Bernard. Obviously, Eric's done some too. Where do you see Terrell Bernard fitting into this group? Because obviously Tremaine and Matt are locked in as the starters on a team who primarily played 2 linebacker last year.
Yeah, so I'll agree with you. I don't think he's drafted as the succession plan to Tremaine Edmunds. I don't think that was the plan in drafting him. I think the plan in drafting him was more just to get depth. And clearly the Bills drafting 2 linebackers in this draft, it showed that Brandon Beane viewed that position, the 2 position or the linebacker position as a whole behind Matt Milano and Tremaine Edmunds, as a way for rookies to make this roster. And that should speak volumes about what he thought of the depth of this position. So I think he truly drafted him as depth, as a guy that can, not as a 1-for-1 replacement, but can replace AJ Klein in 3 linebacker sets on defense. He can do a bit of that blitzing stuff that he likes to do, but he's not going to be as much of a liability in coverage. He's actually going to give you more in coverage. And furthermore, Beane talked about how versatile he is and how he played both Mike and Will at Baylor. And even sometimes he played a little bit of like their star position, their nickel position, where he's covering guys in the slot. So he's very versatile in how he was used at Baylor. And I think Brandon Beane really liked that, in the fact that he could, in a pinch, back up both linebacker spots. And furthermore, I actually think there's a little bit of a vision to use him as that big nickel that we've been talking about for years and years and years. He has that tweener body type. He has good pass coverage acumen. He has good processing abilities of what's going on around him in terms of route combinations and everything like that. So I think there's a vision to try and find ways to get him on the field, not necessarily to replace Teron Johnson, but for those teams that really try to push the envelope against the Bills and say, oh, we know that you guys just live in nickel. So they're still going to live in, pseudo nickel, but they're going to have Bernard on the field. You lose a little bit in coverage, you gain a little bit in run stopping, and you just mix those 2 guys in and have some sort of steady rotation for the teams that dictate that. And I think that's the vision for Bernard. It's him being that depth, versatile piece, replacement for Klein, and giving them a little bit of flexibility against those teams that really try to go against the grain of what the modern day NFL is.
Yeah, I love that take. And I think your boy let us hit it here too. I finally accepted the Bernard pick. He's our Miami package thick to cover someone like Gesicki. Fickle. I like that as a new term.
Yeah.
I like, yeah, I think, and we talk about James Cook on offense being, and on offense, just we talk a lot about not giving up tendencies.
Right.
I think having a guy like Bernard on the field is sort of the same way, right? Because he
Sure.
can cover, he's a good pass rusher, he's a good blitzer. Um, in that way, I feel like it is a little bit of a way to hide a tendency.
Mhm.
If you did want to bring in 3 linebackers, if is he in there to help stop the run? Is he in there to blitz? Like you don't know
Yeah.
necessarily what he's in there to do. And so I'm with you. And I think I'm definitely agree with the comment section. I mean, around his fit, as far as I definitely see him more as a pure, if you're going to say like, where does he fit as far as position? I do think as a pure backup to Milano, that makes sense. I think if
Mhm.
Milano were to go down, he'd be the first one to come in.
Yeah.
But I do think you can use him in addition to Edmonds and Milano and have the 3 of them on the field at the same time in certain
Right.
situations. So I do agree with you there. And I do agree with Jessica here. Bernard is a backup for Milano and for Edmonds in past situations, since he defense 3-3-5 and played against KC. That's interesting. Um, yeah, who doesn't make the final roster? We'll get to that in just a second. And speaking of the linebacker roster in general, is the depth of this group right now? Obviously, AJ Klein's not there, but is the depth of this linebacker group the best that McDermott has had since he's been with the Bills?
I think it is, but I say this with the caveat of literally the only thing that changed is Bernard is in for Klein. So it's all projecting that Bernard's 2022 impact is going to be greater than Klein's impact from 2021 and 2020. So there is a little caveat there, but I mean, I feel better about Bernard as the third linebacker than Klein because he offers more versatility. He offers more of that modern linebacker skill set where, like you said, he's not going to give away tendencies. He's going to be on the field, but you have no idea what his responsibility is. He could be playing exactly like Teron Johnson was playing, but you just add 15 pounds to Teron Johnson. So I like it from that regard. I do. I think the depth did get better with that pick. We'll see if Balin Spector makes this roster that is truly, truly up for grabs. I think Bernard is on the inside looking out, as we've said a few times now. Apparently that's a coined term here. But
I don't. Yeah, I
but
mean, we're already kicking these guys off the team. He's on the inside, but he's looking out. Like he's not. Hell
he's
no.
like, you guys suck. He's on the team. No, but I think Bernard, I feel better about Bernard than I did Klein for the last 2 years. And that's not to slight Klein. Like Klein did great stuff for the Bills, but there were clear limitations for what he could do. And I think there are some limitations with Bernard, but they start and end with his size. I think what he can do on the field because of his processing ability and then the well-roundedness of his skill set, it really just stops. It starts and stops with his size.
I think Klein got some unwarranted hate from the fan base early, but then fans kind of warmed up to him, right? I think like
Mhm.
they saw what he did against in that Seattle game, and they saw that like he he had his limitations, like you said, but he was a good player in his own
Yeah.
right. And I think
Yeah.
fans are going to rally behind a guy like Bernard. We drafted him in the 3rd round. Fans are going to want him to do well. And so I do think there's a little bit element of that. I think you look at this room from a year ago, the Bills kept 6, right? It's essentially the first 6 guys I have listed there. You swap Klein out for Bernard, that's the 6 they kept, right? It was Edmonds,
Mhm.
Milano, Klein, Matakevich, Dotson, and Andre Smith. They draft Balin Spector. They keep bringing back a guy like Markel Lee. Joe Giles Harris sticking around.
Mhm.
Is Tyler Matakevich's roster spot safe in your mind? You look at the numbers from a salary cap perspective. The Bills can cut him pre or post June 1. It's a 750K dead cap hit with 2.5 million in real savings. Should they cut Tyler Matakevich? Could a guy like Balin Spector, could a guy like Joe Giles Harris replace a guy like Matakevich on special teams. Is his roster spot safety? Could you see the Bills potentially moving on from him in the summer sometime?
I think his roster spot is the least safe it's been since he's been in Buffalo. And I think that's the best way that I can put it because, I mean, given his cap hit and the fact that 2 linebackers were just drafted, 2 linebackers that project to being special teams contributors in year 1 if they're both going to make the roster, I think that's why you would kind of put him on the hot seat. Not to say that his job is unsafe or that he's got something to prove or anything like that, but the combination of Bernard, Dodson, Smith, Giles Harris, Spector, and Lee, all it takes is one guy to prove that they can give you 90% of what Matakevich gives you in terms of special teams contributions, but you're getting it at what 40-50% of the cost or whatever it is.
Yep.
I don't actually know the actual cost, but the point being you're getting most of the production for a fraction of the cost, and I think that's what they were going for with the Balin Spector pick in particular. So I'm going to have my eyes on that as a way for the Bills to get a linebacker, a depth linebacker that can hypothetically play both Mike and Will, according to Brandon Beane, or at least that's what he did in college, but get a guy to replace Matakevich on a rookie cost controlled deal because you don't want to be paying 5 special teams aces. And I know that's hyperbolic, but when we just signed Saran Neal and you've been paying Taiwan Jones, you've been paying Tyler Matakevich, you need to find different ways to cut corners. And I think drafting special teams linebackers is a way to cut that corner financially.
Yeah, I know this is something that like drives Judge up the wall, right? Is like paying these premiums for special
Right.
teams only players. It's like it doesn't seem like good asset allocation,
Mm-hmm.
but we also know the Bills are a little bit different with how they value special teams maybe than some other teams. So
Yeah.
this is a bit of a wild card question right here. Because I hadn't listed it on my list of questions, but I'll ask you because Tyrell Dodson is a guy that a lot of fans like. They seen him come in spot duty when Milano was injured, right? When Tremaine, like he's come in spot duty and he's played okay. I wouldn't say he's
Mm-hmm.
played great, but he's played okay. Pops Mafia says Dotson seems ready to step up, but where? Is there a role for Dotson anywhere on defense, or is he purely a special teams guy? I mean, is that his career at this point?
I think his career is kind of destined to be that solid depth with good special teams contributions. But that being said, for the Bills this year, who knows? Like maybe they're not comfortable with Bernard being the backup to Edmonds if Edmonds goes down at any point this year. Maybe Edmonds' backup is Dodson, and it would be Dodson to back up Edmonds and then Bernard to back up Milano. I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
it's necessarily that Bernard can be fluid in backing up both guys. I don't know if they want to task a rookie with both of those responsibilities as the backup. So I think that's tough to tell. But what I will say is that I think what Dodson has done in the limited snaps that he's had in Buffalo has been sufficient. It has been
Yep.
enough to obviously keep him on the roster. He's shown
Yep.
flashes of, I don't want to say greatness and get anything overhyped, but he has shown good flashes. He has, but there have also been consistencies, and that's why he finds himself as a backup. So I think at the end of the day, he's quality depth. He's quality depth, and there is nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that. I agree. And I was just looking at his he's a restricted free agent next year, so the Bills will
Yeah.
have a chance to bring him back probably on the real cheap. So yeah, Matakevich is the interesting one to me. I think some of the comment section was right. Like, would he have been cut already by now? Right? Like, because the Bills, I mean, there's no difference between cutting him now and post June 1. So like they could have realized immediate cap savings
Yeah.
already by cutting him. So that maybe tells me that they're not necessarily interested in cutting him, but maybe they're just going to wait and see if a guy like Spector
Yeah.
can come in and really be that special teamer. Because clearly the way the Bills have valued Matakevich has been that they felt like his role in special teams was warranting a $2.5 million salary. So
Yeah.
it'll be very interesting. So moving on now to safety. And I've only really listed the pure safeties, how the Bills have listed them on their website. So we've got obviously the top: Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, Jaquan Johnson, who was a draftee in 2019, I believe, Damar Hamlin, who was a draftee last year, and Josh Thomas. When we get to corner, I'm going to ask you a question about which corner do you think is most likely to be able to move to safety. But just this group in a vacuum right here: Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, Jaquan Johnson, Damar Hamlin. I like those top four. Given the Bills did not really invest in a pure safety in the draft, they did draft Christian Benford, who many think can move to safety, but it wasn't high draft capital, right? Do you think that the Bills not making that investment, because we thought maybe it was a dark horse position they could go after in the draft, means that Jordan Poyer will ultimately get some kind of extension from the Bills?
I do. I do think he will ultimately get that extension. I don't think it's going to be some sizable 5-year break the bank extension. It's not going to be that Harrison Smith extension that he got from the Vikings at whatever age 32 and set the safety market at age 32. I don't think it's going to be anything like that, but I do think he's going to get an extension, something like probably 2 years. Just keep kicking the
Mhm.
can down the road, like make sure he's here as long as you can, like, kind of kick the can down the road methodically. You don't want to do it too far and push it into his like late 30s and then be like, "Oh god, we have this guy on the payroll and he's been declining for 3 years now." You want to play the slow burning game to this. So, I think they're going to do something like 2 years, bump his pay a little bit, something that is deserving for him because let's be honest, he deserves it. And it's going to
Yep.
be enough to keep him in town. I think ultimately it's going to get done. Everything that Brandon Beane has talked about in recent pressers about Jordan Poyer, it has been glowing. Obviously, he shouldn't say anything otherwise, but I think he truly does mean the words that he says about Jordan Poyer. Obviously, someone that he brought into the system as a reclamation project, someone that was kind of outcasted by the league. He comes into Buffalo, becomes the best version of himself, as we always talk about. And here we are. And he certainly deserves all of his flowers, finally gets that all pro season. He does deserve a pay bump, a pay increase, but I don't think it's going to break the bank by any means.
This is an interesting one with Poyer because I feel like, to your point, the Bills could go one of two ways with this, right? They could give him a long term, even like a 4 or 5 year deal, where the Bills actually could probably save a few bucks, right, by giving him a 4 or 5 year deal,
Right.
because they're going to give him that longevity. On the flip side, they could pay a little bit of a premium, give him more AAV for a shorter term deal, like a 2 year deal, and then maybe say, hey, you know, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. If you perform at this level for the next year or two, we'll do another 2 year deal for
Exactly.
you that looks like this one and ultimately gets you more money. So it'll be interesting because I do think that if the Bills do give him a shorter deal, it will have to be for more money or more guaranteed money than what the equivalent would have been for like a 4 or 5 year deal. And what I mean by that, if if I'm not getting this point across, it's like you can give him probably a 2 year deal for $30 million and pay a premium, pay up, but you know that you're going to kind of get out of it after 2 years. Or you could give him like a 4 year deal for $45 million, right? Something where like you can
Hmm.
save some bucks like by giving them a
Right.
longer deal. But do you want to do that if you're the Bills? Because then you potentially put yourself in a cap issue in a few
Hmm.
years where you've been kicking the can down the road for a few of these contracts. So I would give him like a 2 year $30 million deal, or like a 3 year 3 year something around 35, 3 year 4. Like, he deserves it, right? I think he deserves probably to be in that $12 million a year range. But it'll be interesting to see if the Bills feel the same. I know we were talking in the Cover One group chat, and I think Greg had said something along those lines as well, right? Like, I think he mentioned like 3 years 35 or 3 years 32 or something like that. So it'll be interesting to see what actually comes of that. I do think ultimately he will get something, but I'm gonna be maybe more interested to see like the years he gets than the money, because I think the
That's
money
fair.
is gonna be whatever, but the years are kind of what I'm interested in. So
Yeah.
gonna be very interesting. So I do want to talk about our guy a little bit, Damar Hamlin, our draft favorite from a year ago. Does he have a role on defense this year? I mean, like, we know Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde rarely come off the field, but we did see a couple years ago where Dean Marlowe played about 200 snaps for the Bills on defense. Like, is Damar Hamlin just that guy in waiting? Do the Bills have enough confidence in him to say, okay, Jordan, we've had a nice run with you? Like, I don't think that's the case, but like, is Damar Hamlin a guy in waiting to you, or is he going to become what Jaquan Johnson has become, which is pretty much, okay, you're going to have a spot on this roster, but you're only going to play special teams. You're not going to play defense.
I think for this year, it's kind of that Jaquan Johnson stuff, like that man in waiting. The way I put it is he's like the break glass in case of emergency guy. He's the guy where if either of those two safeties go down, I have more confidence in Damar Hamlin to play safety than I do Jaquan Johnson for whatever reason. I probably just how I viewed each of them in the pre-draft process, respectively. But I do have confidence in him and his defensive ability more so than Jaquan Johnson. That being said, I don't really see an impact for him on the defense in 2022, barring an injury. That's really the only way I see him getting on the field. And that goes for both safety and Teron Johnson, because during his time at Pitt, we saw him dropping down playing a lot of nickel at Pitt. So I could see him being a backup to Teron Johnson. I could see him being the backup to both Poyer and Hyde. I could see him being a backup in multiple areas in the secondary, obviously not boundary corner. But either way, I do like him as depth. I do like him as a contingency succession plan for either of the safeties. Obviously, you need to see how the development goes of the whole thing, but I do like the idea of allowing him to develop behind those guys. Don't task him with too much responsibility right away. Let him slowly develop behind those guys, learn things from those guys. But I think you're targeting like a 2024
Mm-hmm.
starting date for him. And it's tough because at that point you're kind of on the precipice of, okay, we're going to give him a year to prove that he's a starter, and then we have to pay him if he does well,
Yep.
or we have to let him walk if he does too well, or if he's just nothing. So I think it's an interesting little, you're just in a really tough like tipping point with Damar Hamlin and his cost control of his contract, but I do like him as depth.
Yeah, and I mean, Dean Marlowe obviously, parlayed his very limited amount of snaps he got on defense into a contract with the Lions, and I believe now he's with Atlanta. So, like, there is a chance to go that route with your career if you do have any opportunity with the Bills. But, the Bills could say, like, look, Damar, like, we're going to keep you here for your entire rookie contract. You're going to be depth. You're going to learn from two of the best in the league. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe when the time comes, you'll have your chance. And that may be valuable to him, right? Hone his craft. I mean, obviously he's going to get plenty of run in the preseason, so we will see. Okay. And Josh Thomas, he was practice squad last year. I would imagine probably the same
Yeah.
fate for him this year. The Bills are only going to keep four safeties, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm.
This is probably one of the more cut and dry rooms, I believe, on the roster. Okay. Moving on to last but not least, the corner room, a very hot topic all spring and all winter, really, since Trey White's injury. It's a deep room, right? From top to bottom. We've got Trey White. Hopefully he'll be back for the opener. We'll see. The Bills went out and drafted Kaiir Elam. They have Taron Johnson at the nickel. They still have Dane Jackson, who got a lot of playing time last year. They brought back Saran Neal, obviously, for his special teams ability, but he's in this room. Cam Lewis, Nick McLeod, Christian Benford, who they drafted, Elijah Griffin, who they brought back on a 2-year futures deal, Tim Harris, and then Trayvon Fuller, who was a UDFA. So a long list, but I think a good list, right? I think it's a good
Mm-hmm.
list. They kept 5 corners last year, which included Saran Neal. So that was Trey White, Levi Wallace, Taron Johnson, Dane Jackson, and Saran Neal. Kaiir Elam now kind of filling in that Levi Wallace spot. So that your top 5 theoretically are Trey, Elam, Johnson, Jackson, and Neal again. But my first question to you now is, because we just finished kind of looking at that safety group. There's 5 names. There's a ton of names here in this cornerback group. What corner here, or what guy that is officially dubbed a corner based on depth charts and roster sort of listing, has the best chance maybe to make a mark and maybe play safety, maybe show some versatility, give the Bills a thought to keeping this guy on the roster because he can maybe play corner, he can play nickel, maybe he could play a little safety. Is there a guy on this list near the bottom of the depth chart that kind of screams that to you?
Yeah, the only one is really Christian Benford. I toyed around with the idea of Nick McLeod, but there was too much pointing in the direction of his athleticism to stick with wide receivers on the boundary and what he can do as a boundary corner for me to say he should just go play safety despite all of his athleticism. But I think Christian Benford is the one that screams it the most out of this group. He's someone that Brandon Beane has dubbed as a guy that has the versatility to play safety, to play nickel, to play on the boundary. And when you watch his tape, he is a physical corner. He's not necessarily like a press corner or anything like that, but in run defense, you can see him setting the edge with, stacking wide receivers and really getting through their chest plate. He's very solid in run support. I believe he had 4 total missed tackles this year, something like that. In his career, his missed tackle percentage was below 6%. So him coming from depth as a safety to make tackles wouldn't be a terribly difficult transition for him. So I think there are reasons. Furthermore, he's a little bit tight-hipped when he's playing corner. So I think that's another reason that you might have to transition someone to safety. That being said, I totally understand why Bean and Benford would want to try him at cornerback first, because for Bean, it's a more valuable position to hit on a cornerback. It's just more valuable. And for
Mm-hmm.
Benford, it's you make more money if you play corner than you do playing safety. So I think it makes sense for both parties to just try out corner to see if it
Mm-hmm.
works. But ultimately, I do think his skill set could push him to safety. He's got great ball skills, allowing him to see the quarterback and the wide receiver routes all at once in his field of vision could be very beneficial to couple all of his skills together with those ball skills and make a play on the football. So I think he's the guy that could transition to safety, but time will tell. We'll see how he does in the preseason.
Yeah, and this is a tough one for me because I just like, with those top 5 guys, I don't like Saran Neal's not going anywhere. You just gave him that money to be your special teams guy. He's not going anywhere. I mean, obviously Trey, Kaiir, Taron Johnson, they're going to be your top 3 when Trey's healthy. And like, I find it hard. I find a hard time putting Dane Jackson not on the team, not on the final 53. So like, where is Christian Benford's role or path to making the team?
Right.
And so that's when I kind of look over at the safety room and I'm like, well, could he potentially knock a guy like Jaquan Johnson off the roster? Like maybe. I don't know, right? But like, if the Bills see a future for Christian Benford and Jaquan Johnson has kind of run his course, right, as he has as a backup free safety, like, I don't know, is this a possibility for him to get a path that way? I also think that should Trey White not be ready for the opener, that may be his best chance to make the team as well. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
if for some reason Trey White, like, God forbid he goes on like PUP or something like that, right?
Right.
But like, for some reason he goes on PUP, which I'm not saying he is. I'm just saying, like, worst case scenario, then that could mean a path for Christian Benford to make the
Yeah.
team. But I find it really interesting. It's hard for me to find a path. I do like him as well. I do love his ball skills. I mean, there's not a lot of footage that I could find
No,
on
there's not much.
Nova games, but they look like they're playing in like high school stadiums, honestly, from what I could tell. But
My one thing with his path to the roster in terms of like corner versus safety is I think it's somewhat equally difficult when you're talking about, all right, he's not beating out any of the top 5 guys. So
Right.
at corner, you're talking about him beating out a Cam Lewis, which I think has some merit in terms of the idea of him being someone that can play corner, he can play safety, and he can play nickel in
Mm,
theory. So, that gives a reason for versatility to knock someone like Cam Lewis off the roster, who clearly he hasn't even made the roster. He's been a practice squad guy. But the reason I think this has some merit is because I think that's equally as difficult as beating out a guy who's held so much confidence from the coaching staff to be so good on special teams in Jaquan
yep,
Johnson. So I think it's
that's true.
equally as difficult to do that. The caveat to this is, what if Benford is just so good on special teams that he forces them to cut Taiwan Jones and keep 6 cornerbacks?
Yeah,
So
I could that
that's
would be
the
nice. Yeah.
I don't know if he's necessarily competing with corners or safeties. He might just be competing with any position group
Or
that's
maybe they keep
competing for
only 5
special teams.
linebackers.
Right,
Maybe they only keep
exactly. Exactly.
you
So
know?
I don't know if he's necessarily competing within his position. I think he's competing more on special teams and using that versatility to leverage himself more value amongst the roster relative to other players.
This is an interesting comment from Dilly Dilly Dale. Dane has got his work cut out for him. Yeah, like, it was a year ago where we're like, Dane's gonna compete with Levi for
Yeah.
CB2, and now, he's kind of fighting to kind of retain maybe that CB3 role, which I think he will, honestly,
Yeah.
like, as far as the third boundary guy. It just, like, doesn't seem to me like I mean, it would take a monumentally, like, amazing training camp, I think, for, like, a guy like McLeod or Benford to beat out Dane Jackson for
I
that
agree.
third boundary corner role. It is very interesting. So Our Lads has Elijah Griffin listed as a nickel corner. Um, and I know you've talked a little bit about his versatility. So the Bills obviously gave him a 2-year futures deal. I mean, to me, he's a practice squad developmental guy again for another year. But maybe a guy like Elijah Griffin could be in the mix beyond 2022, and gives like guys like Nick McLeod and Benford some competition. I mean, obviously, competition brings out the best in everyone, and I think that's what the Bills have really created a competitive cornerback room. And it's sad to see Levi Wallace go in my mind, but like this is going to be a fun cornerback room, right? The people who
Oh
wanted
yeah.
that athletic CB2 got it in Kaiir Elam. So that, I guess, leads me to my last question of the night at corner is, what is Kaiir Elam's role day one? Like right now, what is his role?
He's CB2 with CB1 skill set. Like, he has the traits to be a cornerback one in this league, someone who can lock down one side, he can lock down and trail with a receiver, he can do whatever you need him to do. He has the versatility, he has the athleticism to do whatever you ask of him. But I think what's great for him is he has all of those traits to be a lockdown corner and be a CB1, but for the Bills, it's going to be perfect for him. It's super advantageous to his development that he won't be completely thrown to the wolves from the get-go. He won't be someone who's asked to just match up with the opposing team's number one wide receiver. Sure, he might have to do that right away if Trey can't get on the field right away,
Mm, hmm.
but that could be beneficial to his overall development, where he gets a taste of what it's going to take, but he doesn't have to do that for the entirety of the season, where he goes to a porous secondary right off the bat. He gets drafted to the Jets right off the bat, and he's their guy. Like Sauce has to do that now. Sauce just
Yeah.
has to mirror every single team's top wide receiver now. That's what he's going to have to do, sink or swim. Kaiir Elam's going to get a taste of that if Trey isn't healthy right away. He's going to get a taste of that, but then he's going to get to see what it means to do your 111th and just be responsible for one side of the field, not necessarily be responsible for taking away the other team's top target. So I think it's going to be very beneficial for his development long term to get a taste of what it means to be the top dog on defense at the cornerback position in the secondary, but then he's going to be able to just kind of go back into his role and be who he is
Hmm.
and just accept what that role is and be the best at that role.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting, as Jessica points out, depends on White's situation for the
Yeah.
first game or even the first few, depending on what happens. I mean, he could be thrown to the Wolves, but we know it'll be temporary, which has got to be a comforting fact. Get some reps, gonna see how you stack up. But like, I also think from a mentality standpoint that he's going to be equipped to handle that should that come his way.
Yes.
Should he have
Yes.
to be thrown into that situation, he instills more confidence in me that he can mentally handle that maybe than a guy like Dane Jackson could, right? Who
I think
people
that's
thought
fair.
maybe. But yeah, let's just all hope Trey's back and ready to roll for week one. At least if like for some reason we get a good draw week one and play the Titans week two, like maybe the Titans receiver core is not looking so great. So we'll see. We got a super chat here from your boy Lettuce. It's going to be deflating when Sauce learns that Diggs is daddy. Yeah, I mean, look, hey, you're getting paid top 5 draft money, right? Like that's the expectation, Sauce. So we'll
Mhm.
see how you do. Like I like Sauce, but that's a tough situation to go into if you're him. But hey, he earned the top 5 pick, and
Yeah.
it'll be
Yeah, he
very
did.
interesting to see how that goes. Before we head out, I did want to bring up this last comment because I thought it was a very interesting question. Let me see if I can find it now. Here it is from Pops Mafia. Now that we covered all the position groups, what position group on the defense do you still think needs the most improvement as we stand now after the draft?
It's a great question. I really want to say interior defensive line, but it's just like it feels wrong to say that given everything that the team did to get better there this offseason. How much money was spent to get better there this offseason. It feels like I'm betraying Brandon Bean by saying that. But like
uh,
where else needs work? Seriously. The thing is, like, nowhere needs work. Everywhere is
I
good. You're
know
picking like the
it is.
lesser of evils type of thing. Obviously, it's like what is the least good. Um, I think it's interior defensive line. I think that's it. There's 4 good guys. There's 4 guys that I have confidence in. Oliver, Jones, Settle, and Phillips, but I struggle with the depth. I do. I struggle with the depth. I struggle with what we're gonna get from guys like Settle and Phillips this year. I think
Mm,
Phillips has been iffy since he left Buffalo. He's had a weird up and down career. I'm not necessarily sold that we're gonna get great production from him, but I'm happy that we brought him back. It's just I don't know. I'm kind of left in a spot where I think we're set at that position. Don't get me wrong. But I also think we could get better there. And there aren't many other areas on this defense that I think that with. It's not necessarily an indictment on that position group. It's more an indictment on how well Brandon Bean has done to build this defense.
yeah, I'm with you. And the way that the Bills addressed corner with the first round pick that they had has really kind of like filled that last bit of gap. It's like almost like putting that last infinity stone in the gauntlet, to use an Avengers reference there. That's kind of what it feels like to me, because you're right. Like there's not a lot of holes on this roster. Corner, you could make the argument, right? Elam he's a rookie, right? We still
Mhm.
don't know if Trey White's gonna be back for week one. I could see an argument for that. But there's really not a ton to gripe about right
No.
now. Um, the edge room, we started with the discussion on that tonight, is going to be interesting though, right?
Yeah,
That
it's
like
gonna be
you're
interesting.
not going to sit here and say, well, they need to add another. Like, no, but you need the young guys to step up next to Von
Mhm.
Miller, right? And we
Mhm.
talked about that as well. So defense is going to be very interesting. Number one defense in the league last year for all the talk Josh Allen the offense get. This defense looks like they're going to be locked and loaded again in 2022. So before we head out, let's do like a really quick schedule prediction on how many primetime games we're going to get
Ooh.
on Thursday.
How many did we have last year? We were
I
at
think
4,
four.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
four last
I
year.
think we
Yep.
get to 5. I think we get to 5 this year.
Yeah, I'm going to say 5 as well. I think I'm going to say 5, but because we're always getting disrespected because we're the Bills, and like as much as we are getting respected, there's always some underpinning of disrespect. We'll get 5. 2 of them will be two will be at home. 3 will be on the road.
That's fair. I like the way you framed that whole thing too. That's fair.
Yeah. And if we do get 6, it'll be 2 at home, 4 on the road. All right, so that's going to about do it for us tonight. We will have Judge back on Thursday to go through the entire schedule release. That will be our Thursday show. You can see our upcoming schedule there down at the bottom, scrolling around. We thank you all for being here in the comments section tonight. Smash that like on your way out. Leave a comment, leave a review, and 5-star rating on the podcast if you're listening in audio form. And Kendall, thank you for joining me tonight without Judge. We did our best to kind of hold down the fort without him. We know he's the glue that keeps the Air Raid Hour together. So we hope you all enjoyed it. And we will see you on Thursday. Until next time, go Bills.
Go Bills.